So with patient education on the standard, we have we take three different types of content. We do um, CRAMES in patient, we do CRAMES exit writer, which we use in the ED, and then we use Elsevier exit care, which we use in the St. John Clinic space. And so Cerner has the ability to kind of map those locations out based on tracking groups. So as part of transition, like when a new unit comes on or a new clinic opens up, um, somebody is responsible. So typically when a new unit opens or whatever, we build a new outpatient unit, something like that. So like the transitional care unit that got created at Jane Phillipson in Tulsa, I went out and added those transitional care units to the tracking group for CRAMES inpatient. When St. John Clinic adds a new location, that Vicky or Shelley, in part of their transition process, go and add those groups or add those new clinics to the Exicare location, tracking location, the ambulatory tracking location. So the two tools that we always use to manage patient education are tracking DB tools, because just like most everything else, DPART related, it's managed in patient education is managed through FirstNet. So from inside of tracking tools, we can go customize and then patient education, and this will let you see what tracking groups, what contact domains that tracking group is associated to. So each content domain has two, basically file domains or file structures. So ambulatory uses ambulatory, and then I think the second one for ambulatory is the outpatient, I think is what we're using as the secondary domain for ambulatory. CRAMES inpatient uses two, so there's the inpatient, and then there is CRAMES inpatient, and then the ED has exit writer ED, and then their backup domain or their primary domain is emergency department, with their backup domain being exit writer ED. So each content type has two domains that it can get loaded into. And where this comes to benefit is we can, so when we get to the part today where we're talking about the actual process of doing the upgrade, you can delete everything in the backup domain and reload new content in without disrupting the domain that they're pointed to. And what that allows us to do is their old content will map to new diagnoses that are being built from the backend, from the secondary domain. So we load the instructions in both domains, but we take some steps out so that when we load into the primary domain, we're just loading the instructions because the diagnosis tables are already built, and it makes that process run a little faster. So because we have to do this after hours to minimize impact, like the ED, I usually just have to ask, like, hey, when can this is going to go down? These associations are not going to be available. They don't usually care because they function off their custom education primarily, but it's always at night, which kind of sucks. So basically, content gets loaded in both primary and secondary domain for all three content types, and the actual process of loading them takes about 3 hours each. And sometimes longer, just depending on what the content looks like for those pieces. So if they added like a ton of content, or if there's like new diseases that have been that they've just created education for, like the Zika virus was new a couple of years ago, that content upload took forever because there were so many pieces of education that came along with that whole Zika scare. So to and I'm pretty sure that you know how to do this already, the assignment locations for the tracking groups. So like when a new unit gets added, we come in here, pick assignment locations, pick ambulatory tracking group, and then we just scroll to the bottom and add the new org name for that clinic on a new row. So they just click add row and go find it out here and add it in. And then that automatically associates that org that's built to the ambulatory tracking group, which gives them the exit care patient ed on their depart button, or their patient ed button is, I think, what it's called.
We have to do this for inpatient units also, for the whole depart.
Correct. Yeah. So like when the transitional care units got built, we'll just see here. I don't know where they got built. Maybe they don't even have education over there and nobody is saying anything, which would be stupid.
They got built under ambulatory?
Maybe. Let's see. And so one of the kind of the sucky things about this is that it doesn't stay chronological, so you can't scroll to the bottom of the list and be like, oh yeah, the last one added was this. Like, you just have to go looking through it. So I don't know why this one's in here, but whatever. We'll just sort it and see if they're not St. John Clinic. Whatever. I'm hoping they're in here somewhere.
Maybe they're just
what?
not in build.
Oh yeah, that
Maybe
could be true too. Yeah, we'll just hope that that's what's really going on. So anyway, so as we open new departments or whatever in the hospital, we would go add them to a tracking group as well so that they would have patient education available. And this is where we go to do it. Other than that, so the other thing that gets kind of useful, so once you've identified that there are new patient education content, you have to get the package IDs for all three of them. I put in a change control, get Diane to get them loaded in a non-prod, so that, and I always load non-prod even though it takes forever, because I can do non-prods during the day. So I can just, while I'm working on whatever I'm working on, I can just go run the utility to update the patient ed content while I'm working during the day, and I can keep the window active and all that good stuff, and it stays compiled. And when it's all done, I can say, okay, well, that one took X amount of time. That's how much time I'm going to need to budget one of these nights or whatever to make this work. So
time is pretty similar to prod.
Yeah. Sometimes the weird thing is you would think that, so prod has way more resources to process the patient ed, so you would think that it would process faster. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it takes longer in prod than it does in non-prod, but build seems to be faster than, oh yeah. So build is faster than mock, and prod is faster than both of those, but it's all related to this space on the database that we have. It's called a blob space. So basically when the content manager is running new content, it saves everything to this temporary blob space, and then loads it into the actual table space from there. So build only has like 18 gig, mock has like 10 gig, and prod has like 36 gig of blob space for patient education. The Cerner recommendation is that you have 20 gig per content domain, but when I tried to get them to up it for us, they wouldn't. So what ultimately ends up happening is the front end of the patient ed manager kind of just starts to freeze up. Like you can't see that it's doing anything. So I run this query on the back end just to make sure that it is actually still doing something. And then just let it be frozen, and it will update itself every once in a while, but it's really sporadic because it runs out of memory, and this blob space has something to do with that. But anyway, so first thing I always do, so the process that I used to do is, okay, I put this on my calendar to go check every quarter. Like, I need to go check and see if there's an update for last quarter, and see what we got. And so when I went digging this time, there's a patient ed load ready that was released in December, but it's only a single quarter release. So like we have, and let me get out here. So what I do basically is I go out to the code warehouse. There's a FirstNet folder out here, which is where we load all the patient ed content from. So CernerWorks will install the packages in the install folder, and they're zip files. So you have to come into the install, and they'll always look like this. So we've got Exicare all languages. You can see I did this last in June and September. So actually, I think I actually did this one in October, and the dates here were when they were actually released. So, or the zip file was created. So, what I'll do is I'll run this and put it in the FirstNet folder. So it'll move over. And what it does is it creates a folder in so on the same drive, I just click the FirstNet folder and say click OK, and it will automatically create a folder for this exit care or the exit writer and exit care, and it'll show up looking like this. So I can see that, here's the exit care 2017 Q2. It always puts all this data in with it. So what I've done in the past is I would just move the old folder into this archive folder so that I can keep track at least, a couple of versions of what we had before. So if Karen ever asks, or if anybody ever asks, we've got a log of what was, or what our previous versions were. So once the content is unzipped, and you can unzip all three of them at the exact same time. Once they're unzipped, you'll get these folders. Then I move the old ones up to the archive, and then you can start the patient ed load process. So to do that, you would open the patient ed manager and basically begin the file upload. It's pretty easy. It just takes forever, which sucks. So it's literally just called Patient Ed Content Manager, and I'll have this in the little worksheet that I'll send you. And the two file types work differently. So like when I go to load Exicare, I'll do Exicare in a full content domain or content upload. I'll pick the domain that I'm going to put it in, which is the ambulatory, because that's where Exicare goes. The database file is always easy to find because, again, here I can just go to the iDrive, go to the FirstNet folder, and pick that Exicare database, which is right here. Then we have to give it the instruction folder. The instruction folder comes up a little bit differently. It's kind of weird that Cerner built this FN tool and it doesn't work the same way for both links, right? So I click the first link and it gives me like that Windows style lookup, and this one is almost like the save as link. It's weird, but either way, it's the same process. I click the drop down, go to the iDrive, go to the FirstNet folder, open the exit care, and so for exit care, I'm going to open the DI folder and say select. In the exit writer and Crames, there's one more folder where you have to go into this RTF location, and I actually think this one's too deep. And I'm kind of make this mistake all the time, so I'll be sure to get this nailed down and tell you where to stop. So, like, I think this is actually where you stop on that one. Otherwise, it gets stuck. And when it's stuck, I mean, it's frozen forever and it can't find the instructions and you have to start over. So, basically, you're going to want to know what instructions are you going to load. So, since we've fully converted to ICD-10, I don't build the table for ICD-9 anymore. So it's going to load ICD-10, SNOMED, and synonyms. I'll pick all languages in all categories, and then click upload.
So you have the ICD-9 one selected, though?
Yeah, to do not load.
Oh, that means... Oh, I see. I'm not reading. Gotcha.
Yeah, so I picked the ICD-9 so it doesn't load, because it just takes more time for it to load those associations. And that's the longest part of the process. The diagnosis code to education association takes the longest portion of the upload. So when I click upload, it's going to tell me that there's content that already exists. Are you sure you want to continue? I'll say yes. And it's going to begin the delete process. So click OK to delete the content. I'll click OK. And you'll see the status here. It says deleting content domain. This is usually pretty quick. So it happens within like the first 5 minutes of the upload. And this part is kind of important because it makes you acknowledge that the delete's completed before it will actually start the loading process. So sometimes, I'll go check an email or do something with this piece of it, or go, look at my Mantis tickets of whatever it is that I've got to do to get loaded, and come back to see if the window's popped. Sometimes it's really fast and it's just pop and it's there, and I'm like, all right, cool, that was quick. So in this case, I'm going to go look for the last loaded patient ed content that we did. So like I said, there will be a folder, and I'll do this here in just a second. There will be a folder in the FirstNet file with an Excel spreadsheet that you can open up, and it has the last version. So basically what I do is I'll take those packages and just go look for the new package. Since that's not there right now, I don't know what I've done with it. I'm just going to go out to the distributions or the reports page and see, and search for FirstNet and see what's the last thing or Exit Writer, and see what the last package was that we loaded. And again, this is the part where I was like, you can do whatever you want here. It doesn't necessarily have to be the way that I do it. You can keep as many records as you want, or you can just go out and look at this report whenever you want. It's totally up to you and however you want to do it. So I'll look at the installation history. I will pick the client domains for just prod because it makes the report smaller, and generate the report. And so the last package that we loaded was 2016 Q2. This was on, oh yeah, that's way too old. Looking for something a little more current. Okay, so here the last package we had loaded was in October, and you can see the CRAMES ones are always listed together, which is good, but the Exit Care one should be listed somewhere right here with it. So I can either just kind of look on the screen and see where might it be, or I can go searching for that one. But these two packages are always loaded immediately together. and they're always stuck together. And you can see the numbers are chronological too. Like the Crames inpatient always gets the first number, and the Crames exit writer gets the second number. So the two weird. I have my own worksheet logged. That's cool. Let's go. I'm going to go over here really quick just so I have somewhere to type this. So it was package 10066 and 100674. And then I'm going to search for the exit care package. Let's scroll to the top. I don't know why it keeps jumping down there. That's kind of annoying. So exit care was loaded on the same day, and that package was 98916. So the spreadsheet that used to exist out on the iDrive, and I don't know if maybe Cerner deleted it or maybe I just didn't replace it or what happened, but anyways, it used to have, I would just keep track. Here are the packages. Like, ta-da! This one was exit care. Oh no, this one is exit writer. So what I would do from here is go look on the distributions page for that package number and see, like, 100673, does it have a replacement? And it does. So you can see we loaded 2017 Q2. The newest package is 102668, which would take us to Q3 2017, which is kind of surprising that they released them so quickly like that, but hey, whatever. So this one is replaced with 2668. And then I'm going to bet the next one, the 10266.
Do they always release all three at the same time?
So the Crames ones will always be side by side. Like, see, this one says exit writer, and it's sequential. The exit care is the one that's always different. Some used to, they were all the same package number. Like, I could go look consecutively, like I would go look at 102670, and it would be the third package I'd needed, but it's not like that anymore. Because they stopped releasing at the same time. Like, Cerner got out of sync of being able to provide them in time. So now I just have to go look, and sometimes they do sync back up, but sometimes they don't. And so this one did get replaced. And so see how it's like 102452. It's nowhere, it's like totally off the path. Okay, so basically at this point what I would do is I would submit the SR to get those, or, submit the change request to have Diane load those packages into non-prod for me, whatever non-prod I was going to do my preliminary load in. And I would just list these three packages in the change for load testing. You can see these just released like December, so I'm not like super concerned like, oh my god, I'm so behind. Honestly, I don't give enough shits about this stuff to stay on top of it full time, like, because it's not anything anybody notices,
Yeah.
So literally I just put it on my calendar and I go check, and sometimes I come out here and not all three updated. So I'll just make note of it and move on, and then check on the next quarter, and or set another reminder to go check again in a couple of weeks or whatever. But they're usually released around the same time. But so what I'll do is, so now I would submit a change control for non-prod to have these packages loaded. So that's what I'm going to do. And then Diane would basically let me know when those packages were loaded, and then I would just go start my own process until I was ready to move them into prod. And so it usually just depends on my schedule of like, now that I've been in school for the past couple of semesters, it's, what nights am I available to do this? And so last time I split it up. So I did ambulatory on one night, I did inpatient on one night, and ED on a totally separate night, just to keep from having to be up all night long. And then I just, comp that time through the day. So I know it's going to take me 3 to 4 hours to do this. I'm going to budget for 4 hours. I'm going to comp myself on a day, be here for a couple hours, and then bail out, go do whatever I need to do, and then start my patient education load at whatever time around 8-ish. So I do like ambulatory around 8. I do inpatient after 10 o'clock, because that's when their discharges kind of go down. And then I do the ED after 11, but I always do them on different nights. And then kind of get the suck, because if the Citrix window times out while you're doing the patient upload, it'll stop. The process dies. So what I've had to do in the past is basically set my alarm for like every however many hours. I think typically it's like 3 hours. I will set my alarm and go back to my computer and click the box to see if it will move around, so that it will keep running and keep the upload going. And if you can figure out a better way to do it, more power to you.
You said if the Citrix window logs you out, or if it's too long, is that when what happens? It just stops?
Yep.
So what about, didn't it already delete everything?
It did.
So they just don't have anything available during this? I mean, I know you said there was 2, right? Like a backup and a...
Yeah, and so the way that I would do it is I would point them to the backup and then let them have those instructions. The problem that we kept running into with that is that people have all these favorites, departmental favorites saved, and if we change their content domain, they can't get to those favorites. And so it basically has turned out that it's just easier to leave them in the front end domain so that they can get to their favorites and move on than it is to actually move them to a different content domain and move them back.
Where do you different content domain? Is that on the tracking group?
Yeah, so it is in the tracking group, but it's also in this tool. So you can see now it says delete successful. So I click OK, and now it's going to start the upload. So if the upload gets killed, so you can see here that says basically loading information. It's loading the instructions now, and that's always the first part. So after the delete, it loads all the actual files, the instruction files first. So once this process is completed, they can go to their patient education window and search for any of the content that's available.
Just not everything's there, or?
So once this process completes, everything will be there.
Okay.
So the part that takes the longest is the diagnosis association. So, and because we're loading all languages now, it takes a little bit longer than it used to, because we used to only load English and Spanish. But that was per Phyllis's instructions, and then when I've communicated that to Regina was pissed, first of all, that we were not giving our providers all of the options available. And when I talked to Jessica about it, I was like, so how do you feel about this? And she goes, well, why wouldn't we give them all the languages? And I said, that's a good point. I'm doing it for this one. I might as well. So I just have started including all of the languages no matter what. So I used to run reports and figure out like, well, how many patients do we really have with these languages? And then I just gave up on that. So we just load them all, whatever's available, we load it and move on. So once these diagnosis instructions get loaded, the content's available. So if the user logs out, logs back in, they can search for anything. What doesn't happen at this point is the diagnosis association. So if they're, you know how today there's the suggested education, and that's what plays into the MU reporting. That's the last part that gets built. So all the instructions get loaded first, then the diagnoses and associations get loaded. So it goes through the table little by little. So if the window dies, it's typically going to die once this is finished. It's going to die on the diagnosis association table build. And that's almost like the most important part of it, but it takes the longest.
Okay.
And so during the last patient education upload, we actually purged the database, which in Cerner it's kind of wishy-washy on how they've instructed us to do that portion of it. So we used to, every single time I did a patient education load, I would purge the diagnosis table and we would start from scratch every single time. And they were like, no, don't do that. You're damaging the file structure. You're truncating the table, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, my bad. So this last time that we did it, you had that ticket that D part was taking too long. Well, then Cerner came back and said, oh, it's because you have all these dead files from doing domain content copies. Like, that makes no sense, but whatever you guys say. So the recommendation, again, is to start doing a diagnosis purge or a table purge off those diagnosis associations. My goal with that, or my plan with that, was to do it once a year, but not to do it every single time we do a load, because technically these are supposed to release every quarter, and it takes way longer, so I didn't want to have to spend all that extra time doing that piece of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
how do you do that?
Yeah, so that part, we have this fancy little query. So basically, this part basically will identify the entire patient education relation table for you and will give you a count on how many records exists. And then when I told you that sometimes there is like the window will freeze up and I'm like, shit, is it really frozen? Did I do something wrong, or is it just frozen on the front end and I can't see that it's doing anything? I can run this query on the back end to see if the table's growing, and if it's growing, then I know it's still working. But almost inevitably, it dies. It freezes on this front end. You can see how like it's updating right here with the number, and it's kind of blinky. It flashes every once in a while to do its refresh. Eventually, once we get to the diagnosis association, that will stop, and the number will just sit there for minutes. And you're like, well, what's happening? So you can run this query to see if the table's growing. And if the table's growing, you're in good shape. You can keep moving on. This line right here will tell you any of your custom your custom patient education for the relation table. So like if we've created custom relations for all the diagnoses, this will tell you that they're created. So we can tell by a -1 that it's one that was created by us. And then delete abandoned records from the table. This is the part that JD was like, no, don't do that, whatever. And I'm just like, dude, make up your mind. So and then this blog reference piece, this part is, I'll see if I can find the email where he explains like what to do with this, but used to I would just delete the abandoned records and everything would be fine. And so last time he said that the last time we did this, he said that wasn't good enough anymore, that we would have to start running the full purge of the purge on the whole table. And I have a separate query for that, how to Oh, maybe it's in here. That process is in here. Oh yeah, there we go. So under task, purge diagnosis codes is how you would run that, the purge on the table, which basically truncates the table. The last part of this has to do with that long blog reference space that I was telling you about. So this will tell you, um, depending on the domain that you're in, will tell you what how big your long blob space is. And so this is the numbers that I was spouting out to you earlier. Like, yeah, we have 18 gig here and 10 gig there and 32 gig here. This is how I found that out. Is I went and collected this data using this query.
And so those other two queries about the delete, do we really ever use those, or would we use the purge in the tool, you think?
So I still use these. So this was a big deal for a while. They would always talk about our abandoned records. Like, oh, you have all these abandoned records. You need to go clean up. So I would just run this and delete all the abandoned records. Done. Okay, that's easy. So this, to me, really wasn't ever a big deal. So what would happen is, as this application does an update, so when the patient ed tool goes in and deletes out all the instruction pages, there would be instructions left because it didn't have a real inventory of what was left over. So I would go run this statement to delete those custom instructions off the primary domain, or the abandoned records, basically. And they get abandoned because the diagnoses codes goes away, but there was no way to update the purge record or update the association table because it wasn't identified that the code went away. It just did, stuff like that. These tools are not very good at doing what they're supposed to do.
Right. Okay. So what was the select from patient ed relation? What was that one used for?
So this one will tell you how many abandoned records you have.
Okay.
And then so you could see how many you have, and then you could go delete them. And then, so basically what I was doing with this is I would run this line of query, and then I would go delete them all, and then I would run this one again to see if it actually deleted them all. Sometimes it wouldn't. I'd have to run it again. It was really stupid.
That delete, or the delete abandoned records,
Yeah.
really just going to, it doesn't do the exact same thing as that purge, right? Or is it supposed to?
It's totally different. So what
Totally
happened? Yeah, so what happens with the delete abandoned records, this one right here, these pieces, it's just looking on the table and leaving the table with the same number of rows that it already had. And then when we load the new instructions, it just fills in the table until it gets, until all the rows are filled, and then it adds new rows to the table as it needs to. Where when we purge the table, it takes all the rows in the table and deletes them and starts the table at the new row identifier of like 7,642,000, whatever it is. Which is why JD says it's a bad thing. Evidently, if we continue to purge this table and the number gets too high, we're going to run into the issue where we can't read the instruction files because the row identifier associated to it is a number that's too long than the system's able to read.
Well, and that doesn't surprise me because we've already seen that in a few,
right,
like where our code values are large. So.
Yep. And so that's why Cerner tells you one thing this quarter and it changes on the next code level and all that good stuff. So I just always try to be as careful as I can with whatever I'm doing with this stuff, so that if something looks weird, I always check the abandoned records and I always do that delete, but unless we're having issues in other places like we did last time, I wasn't planning to run that table purge unless instructed by Cerner because of an incident or whatever. So
Do you load this content? Because you said there's like two of those domains for each one, right? For each tracking group.
Yeah. So what we do, or the process that I have in place, is I'll do this full load on the secondary domain so that the master totten gets updated. So the master totten is basically all of the table spaces put together. Like, it's the master record for everything that we've loaded in any of the domains, but no one points to that domain. So once we load content into the secondary domain in this fashion, so where we only have the do not load ICD-9 codes, when I switch to the primary domain, and I only do this in prod, when I switch to the primary domain, you check all of these off, so we're not going to reload the ICD-10 and the SNOMED codes. We're only going to load the synonyms into the primary because the diagnosis association already exists. All of the diagnosis instruction tables are built. We just need the instructions to be available in that domain. It runs way faster. So it's less of an impact on the front end user. Since we're not switching them back and forth between domains anymore, we can leave them in the master or in their primary domain. They can still search for patient education while they're in their primary domain, and we've deleted the diagnosis association table until we update the primary domain again. So while we're loading all the diagnosis codes and the association table build is taking place, they can still function on the front end without any impact, except they have to search for their education instead of it being suggested. But they can still at least search for it. So once we move to the primary domain and load the content on the primary domain, they lose those instructions until the table gets finished being built. So if we loaded all the ICD-10s and the SNOMED codes, we're looking at another 3 hours. Where on the primary, if we just limit it to synonyms, it loads like in 20 minutes.
So, is there any so you said you do all of it in the non-primary domain?
Yeah, in prod.
Is there any reason we can't do that during the day? Like, what do they notice?
We can do that during the day, but so when we purge off the diagnosis associations, the suggested education isn't guaranteed while you're deleting the content on the master totten.
Which is part of this little process right here, right?
Right.
But you said that takes about like 20 minutes?
It does.
So like whenever you prod primary domain is what you have to do after hours, so it's only taking about 20 minutes?
The after hours part is this big long piece that I've just started here. So rebuilding this whole instruction and diagnosis instruction association table joinings is what takes the longest, and that's what I do after hours. And what I will typically do is just right afterwards I'll switch the domain and reload just the synonyms into the primary domain. So I've never done it during production hours because of the number of discharges taking place, and because MU reporting is dependent on suggested education being available.
So you're kind of saying like both domains share the same table?
They share the same diagnosis association table, yes. All the domains share the same diagnosis association table.
So whenever you do the non-primary domain, it's still affecting the primary.
Right. It affects it, but only at the association level, which is important for MU reporting. So in my opinion, I was like, well, it's not really a big deal. I mean, it's like one day. Like, really, they're going to fail MU measures because for 3 hours we didn't have, like how many discharges are we really doing in 3 hours? But Karen was pretty specific that she didn't want to impact, she wanted a zero impact for MU. So it's always been an after-hours process, which kind of blows.
Right. And you're going to help me. You're going to do some instructions for me, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna have the
All
whole
right.
thing written up, and then the first one this next one that we're about to do, this next upgrade, we'll basically do it together.
That sounds good. I was thinking maybe like after we get the files or whatever, I could like in the non-prod, I could do it and you can watch me or something.
Yep, that's kind of the game
That work?
plan. Yeah, and then we can tag team on like, hey, I've got Wednesday night available to do this one. The ambulatory one is the easiest because they close at 8 o'clock. Like, no one's using it after 8 o'clock. You can just run it, and it's sometimes almost done before you go to bed, and then ta-da, you're free and clear. Don't have to worry about that one.
Right, it's the other two.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you have to notify anyone, or do you just do it after these times?
So I usually will just tell Jessica, like, hey, I'm gonna do these, and they'll take it to safety huddle the night before or the morning of or whatever.
Okay.
So it's pretty cool. That part's pretty easy. In the EDs, they don't really care anymore because, like I said, they use custom instructions. So when all the suggestion goes away, they don't even notice most of the time.
They don't, okay.
Yeah. Like, I'd rarely ever even get tickets because their education's gone. Because they use their departmental education so heavily.
Maybe they would let me do that during the day then.
It's possible. I mean, it literally has no impact on them. They don't even know. Because they don't use suggested ed. They don't. They just don't use it.
I wonder if even, I mean, I'm assuming the hospital must use it quite a bit, or...
I've never gotten a ticket
Oh,
from them either. I mean, I have
that
effed this up sometimes really bad, and I was fully anticipating a onslaught of tickets and didn't get a single one. So, it is what it is. I mean, there's been days that I babysat this crap through the whole night, and at 8 o'clock in the morning, I was trying to, go jiggle around with it and make sure that so usually after I load the content, I'll log into the domain, the actual front end domain in Cerner, and check to make sure suggested education is at least showing up. And, so there's been times that, it's 7 o'clock in the morning and I'm in the front end application and there's no suggested patient ed. And I'm like, what the F happened? And I panic, have to start over, and no one ever calls in a ticket.
because they can get to just the regular education, right?
Right. So they can still search for whatever they want. Which is normal, right? I mean, when patients are discharging, typically, the education has already been added to them, in most cases, has already been added to them, or, they're the D part instructions that they're going to print out for them, they're already printing out and taking over to them. So it's just weird. There's no phone calls, ever. There's been one time that I got phone calls, and it was from the ED, and it was when we converted from ICD-9 to ICD-10.
And so really the only time that they would not have patient education available is when you're doing that primary, right? The synonym.
Right.
And it just can come for just a few minutes or whatever.
Yeah, it takes about 20 minutes to do, but the tricky part is if they're logged in when I do it, they keep the cached version of what they could see before. If they log in while I'm doing it, while the delete's taking place, or after the delete's taking place but the load hasn't finished yet, they get nothing. And if they log out and log back in again after it's all done, it all comes back. So it's most of the time they don't notice. And now that we're pretty much MVD everywhere in the hospital, it's not going to matter. Like if you start the delete process once a shift has started and everyone's already got a copy of Cerner chilling out there, they're going to see patient ed content because they're on that cached version of Cerner.
I may have to talk to Karen and see if I can't convince her to let me do the non-part during the day, even though it'll affect both domains. So really the two domains, the only difference in the tables is going to be the actual education content.
Right.
They both share the.
Right. So during the process, the education that they have access to today. So say we've already upgraded the back-end domain. We just need to run the synonyms on the front end. They'll still have all the old files. All the old instructions will still be on the domain that they're in until we do the little conversion process.
Okay.
And that may be something that we can test through in a non-prod and see if it works and just make that the process. That we do this part during business hours, and then at the time of what the designated time for cutover, we do the front end part, and it's all done. Because ultimately, that's how it's supposed to work. We're supposed to be able to run that back end part during business hours. And I think I did it once. I did it that way one time.
So how would we test to see if it actually like just do it in a non-prod and see if that
Yep.
adjusted is still available while we're doing it, maybe?
Right.
Yeah. I would think that I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, so see where we are right here. The loading instruction files, we're at 27,000 of 32,000. Once this flips to the next step in this is the diagnosis association. So, 31 minutes ago we started this from the beginning and we did some stuff in between. So who knows how long the delete window was sitting there waiting for us. But once this makes it to that 32,443 mark, it's available. So if I were to log in the ambulatory domain right now, I would see no suggested, but I would be able to search for patient education.
Because I guess ambulatory uses suggested also.
A lot. And that's where a lot of their MU is coming from. Oh, actually, I don't even think education is even an MU measure anymore, to be honest with you.
Or for either.
I don't think it is for either. It might still be for the hospital side, but ambulatory is not using it because they don't report MU anymore.
That's what I was thinking. I thought theirs all changed.
So, alright, so I'm putting this stuff off to the side. Son of a gun. Off to the side so I can watch this window at the same time. So it's almost done. So if I go to patient ed, so you can see my suggested is going to be blank. My departmental, there's nothing in there, so it doesn't surprise me. On the all, I can search for whatever I want, and it's loaded because we loaded the content in here. You know what I'm saying? So, it would work for them, and they're not even doing it anymore anyways as a quality measure, so it would just depend on what Karen thinks.
Got it.
Yeah, I would say we should just develop that process and be like, you could just say, this is how Derek trained me to do it.
That works.
See how it's getting kind of starting to get a little glitchy, where like this number is updating in the 500s.
Yeah.
This is where it kind of starts to get weird. Like we've used all the memory in that blob space, and it's starting to get funky, but this part is almost done. So once this detailed piece gets finished, it will start the DX associate. It'll start building the diagnosis associations, and then the process is complete. But that's that. So I'll get a change control submitted. Which domain do you want to use? You want to use build?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So we will. I'll get the change control submitted, and to get those packages loaded and build, and then we'll just kind of go from there. And I'll get you your instruction sheet, and then we'll kind of work through the process once we get started.
Good.
Coolio?
Yep.
You have any questions that I can answer
Nope.
for you now? All right.
Good.
Cool. So I guess next week, I think maybe it just depends. Sometimes we can get these instructions loaded easy, like, oh yeah, that's not a big deal, load it. And then on prod, like they go in pretty quick, and sometimes they don't. So it just depends on what CernerWorks is feeling like. But these are, since they're just content files, they're usually really fast and easy to get loaded. So I'll put that change control in and see what how Diane feels about it, and then we'll go from there.
Okay.
All right. I'll let you know when they get loaded, and then I'll set something up.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. Have a good day.